In the last year of World War II, Japan unleashed one of the most feared weapons of the Pacific, the kamikaze. Young pilots, some barely out of school, were ordered to crash their planes directly into American ships. The word itself means divine wind. Propaganda promised that these suicide attacks would stop the U.S. Navy in its tracks. Hollywood and legend have made kamikazes seem unstoppable, flaming meteors of destruction. The truth is very different. Most kamikaze missions never even reached their targets. The brutal mathematics shows why almost every attempt ended in failure. Japan began organized kamikaze attacks in late 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. By then, their navy was shattered, their pilots inexperienced, and their fuel almost gone. A kamikaze was, on paper, a perfect answer. Turn every plane into a guided missile. A Zero fighter loaded with 500 pounds of explosives, diving at 400 miles per hour, could rip a destroyer apart. But reality was merciless. First, the numbers. Around 3,800 kamikaze pilots died in the war. They damaged or sank 400 Allied ships, killing about 4,900 sailors. On the surface, that sounds devastating. But look deeper. The U.S. Navy had over 1,200 major warships by 1945, plus thousands of smaller vessels. Less than 4% of them were sunk or disabled. For every kamikaze pilot who died, barely one sailor was killed. The arithmetic was catastrophic for Japan. The first weakness was training. Early in the war, Japan's pilots were the best in the world. By 1944, they were gone, killed in years of attrition. Replacements had only weeks of flight school. Many couldn't even take off or navigate properly. American radar tracked them from miles away. Anti-aircraft fire tore into them long before they reached their targets. One U.S. sailor described kamikazes as flaming wrecks falling miles from the fleet. The second weakness was coordination. Kamikazes were supposed to arrive in massed waves, but fuel shortages and inexperience meant groups often broke apart. Lone planes diving at entire task forces stood no chance. U.S. combat air patrols shot them down in droves. Pilots in F-6F Hellcats and F-4U Corsairs reported whole squadrons of kamikazes falling in minutes. Then came the defenses. By 1945, U.S. fleets bristled with anti-aircraft weapons, 40mm Bofors, 20mm Oerlikons, 5-inch dual-purpose guns, and even proximity-fused shells that exploded near targets automatically. Radar-directed fire made American gunners deadly accurate. At Okinawa, U.S., ships fired nearly 500,000 shells at kamikazes. Only a tiny fraction broke through. Here's a shocking statistic. At Okinawa, Japan launched 1,800 kamikaze sorties. Less than 15% hit a ship. That means more than 1,600 pilots died without striking anything. Imagine the waste. Thousands of lives, hundreds of planes, and barrels of precious fuel for results that barely slowed the American advance. Even when kamikazes did hit, the damage wasn't always decisive. Battleships and carriers had armor and damage control crews trained to fight fires. USS Bunker Hill was struck by 2 kamikazes, killing nearly 400 men, but the carrier was back in action within months. Destroyers and smaller ships suffered worse, but the fleet as a whole kept moving forward. Kamikazes could bloody the U.S. Navy. They could not stop it. The human tragedy is often overlooked. Most kamikaze pilots were in their teens or early 20s. Many never believed in the mission. Survivors recalled being pressured, even forced to volunteer. Some wrote farewell letters confessing they hoped their planes would malfunction so they could survive. Others never made it off the runway, crashing from inexperience before they even reached the sea. Propaganda painted them as divine warriors. In reality, they were boys sent to die in machines that were obsolete and outmatched. One captured Japanese officer admitted after the war, "We did not have enough bombs, enough ships, or enough men. So we threw away the last thing we had, our youth." The irony is brutal. Kamikazes were designed to trade one cheap plane for one expensive ship. But planes weren't cheap for Japan by 1945. Building, fueling, and training for thousands of suicide flights drained resources they could not spare. Each kamikaze cost far more than the damage it inflicted. The divine wind became a financial and human disaster. By the end of the war, American sailors no longer feared kamikazes as unstoppable terror. They saw them as tragic, wasteful, and ineffective. One U.S. admiral said, "We respected their courage. We pitied their futility." The truth is clear. Kamikazes did not change the war. They could not stop the American fleets. They could not protect Japan's islands, and they could not alter the outcome. Almost every mission ended in failure. Not because the pilots lacked bravery, but because courage cannot overcome mathematics, radar, and overwhelming firepower. Hollywood likes to show kamikazes as flaming arrows of doom. The reality is far sadder. Boys turned into human bombs, sent against a fleet they had no chance of defeating. It wasn't divine wind. It was tragedy carried on wings.